sorry, Paul. This is all wrong.
What?
You'll have to do it over again. It's not worthy of you. Throw it all out. Except for that part of naming the gravedigger after me. You can leave that in.
I really value your criticism, but maybe we're being a little hasty here.
Paul, what you've written just isn't fair.
Not fair.
That's right. When I was growing up in Bakersfield, my favorite thing in all the world was to go to the movies on Saturday afternoons for the chapter plays.
Cliffhangers.
I know that, Mr. Man. They also call them serials. I'm not stupid, you know. Anyway, my favorite was Rocket Man. And once it was a no-brakes chapter. And the bad guys stuck him in a car on a mountain road and knocked him out and welded the door shut and tore out the brakes and started him to his death. And he woke up and tried to steer and tried to get out, but the car went off a cliff before he could escape. And it crashed and burned, and I was so upset and excited. And the next week, you better believe I was first in line. And they always start with the end of the last week. And there was Rocket Man trying to get out. And here comes the cliff. And just before the car went off the cliff, he jumped free. And all the kids cheered. But I didn't cheer. I stood right up and started shouting, "This isn't what happened last week! Have you all got amnesia? They just cheated us! This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the Cockadoodie car!"
They always cheated like that in chapter plays.
But not you. Not with my misery. Remember, Ian did ride for Dr. Cleary at the end of the last book, but his horse fell jumping that fence, and Ian broke his shoulder and his ribs and lay all night in the ditch, and he never reached the doctor. So there couldn't have been any experimental blood transfusion that saved her life. Misery was buried in the ground at the end, Paul, so you'll have to start there.
Hello and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of coloniabook.com and this is my good friend and co-host, Margot D. of Brooklyn Finchick.
Hi, everyone.
And today, before we jump into our little housekeeping bit, we just want to mention we have a special Cockadoodie guest on today as we wrap up October. Do you want to just let them know who's going to be joining us, Margot?
Yes, it's Alex Steed from the You Are Good podcast. And Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I would jump at any opportunity to talk about Stephen King books and movies.
Yeah, we try not to. There's so many of them, and
you can accidentally become a Stephen King podcast if you don't want to.
Easily, very easily. And so, but we try to stick to just October. Every October we do all spooky movies, scary movies, ghosty movies. And because we decided to do a brand new episode every single week some time ago, we have a lot of them. And we couldn't do a misery every single week. That's kind of hard. We have
Absolutely.
lives. So we have to sometimes consider movies that have been adapted from shorter literary sources. So perhaps a short story, a magazine article, a play, a song, a poem. All of this is to say, we are constantly looking for suggestions. Maybe you just joined us because you're a Stephen King fan. You saw the title of this episode, or you love Kathy Bates as we do. We'll get into the whole James Caan of it all. You have some ideas. You think, oh, I wonder if they've done this. I wonder if they've done that. There's places where you can find out if we've done those things, or you could suggest things that we haven't done, meet other listeners of this podcast, and interact with us on the internet.
Yes, we do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it, but we're much more interactive in our Facebook group. You have to ask to join. And the best thing about the group is that Thaddeus, one of our super fans, actually put 2 posts at the very top. One is all the shows we've done. By the way, Alex, we've done the show for 9 years now. So we have a lot of
I've looked through your back catalog and I am shocked and exhausted on your behalf. I can't believe you have read that many books.
We certainly have. And we also have a post for ideas for people. We also really ask that the movie needs to be on a major streaming app and that whatever the source is, it should be easiest for us to get. For example, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that source is only available really on eBay. They cost like $100 a piece for those paperbacks. So it's got to be something pretty easy for us to get. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, where you spell out book versus a movie. You can just send us us an old-timey email. It's book versus movie podcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. And if you would like some stickers, send along your address and I will drop them in the mail for you. Or Margot will. One of us will.
I've never understood why one of our local universities here in San Diego hasn't reissued Fast Times. It seems like a license to print money. Like, just get the rights, get it. Why can't we make this happen? I don't know. But it's something that's been literally since year one. We have been trying to, we'd like fingers crossed that every year we're disappointed. So sorry if you were hoping we'd done that one. We have not. One day, if the public outrage is to a level.
Is it ultimately owned by Rolling Stone? Like, who owns the Fast Times thing?
I think so.
It might
and
be
we know that guy's like not the greatest, most easy to work with fellow.
You should give Jan a call.
Yeah.
Get him on the horn.
We want to
Famously
cover Silkwood.
big-hearted.
We want to cover Silkwood, but apparently, like, you have to just buy the DVD. It's not streaming anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's a rights issue. So, yeah.
Sometimes that happens. Yeah.
Get on that for us.
We want everybody to be able to get their eyes and ears on the material, including ourselves.
Yes.
So listen, if you really, really love this show and you would like to help keep us in books and movies, you can also support us on Patreon.
Patreon, look up Book vs. Movie Podcast. I want to thank Amy and Christina for joining. We have a couple of very affordable options. As we've said, Alex, we have 9 years worth of shows. So what Margot and I decided to do is we keep 2 years pretty much in our regular feed, and then everything before that goes on the Patreon wall. And we've got some good stuff there. Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, Turn of the Screw, Stand By Me, The Perfect Storm, Harold and Maude. They are all on our Patreon page. So all of you that support us there, thank you. We really just use those for the books and the movies and the software and things like that. But if money is tight, you could just leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. That would be amazing.
We should probably, I was thinking, like, how many trigger warnings? So many. Just a blanket trigger warning, especially for the book. There's a lot of stuff that in the book that was too extreme to make it into the movie, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We are going to talk about Stephen King, and I also want to say, like, in the spirit of trigger warning, we planned to do this episode last month, like well over a month ago. We did not anticipate the things that were going to transpire in Maine, having to do with the place that we're talking about and the author that we're talking about. As we record this, maybe you're listening to this later, but as we record this is the end of October of 2023. I would encourage everybody listening to this, if you haven't done so already, to take a moment. It's super brief. Take a second and look up. In fact, maybe we should link it in the show notes so we can link it in our Facebook page to read the very brief and yet complete statement that Stephen King made about the events that happened in Maine this week in the New York Times. It was really a very moving, realistic assessment, and I mean, so horrible that was at all necessary, but really, I would really encourage you to check it out. So with that aside, let's welcome our guest, who also has some background in Maine.
I sure do. I met Stephen King at a sandwich shop once. That's how
Did
from
you
Maine
really?
I am.
You've been holding
Okay,
back.
we're going to hear all about this. So Alex Steed, as we mentioned before, is a co-host of the I want to get it right.
Good. Yeah.
You are good. I was going to say it's all good. You are
it's
good
all right.
podcast.
It lends itself to being confused for many things.
I love that. What I love about your podcast, and I want you to just kind of explain what it is for folks. But one of the things that I really like about it is that you do the thing. Like, this doesn't always happen. Where, like, people go to the movies, you sit in the movie theater, you watch the thing, and sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not great, and you leave the theater and you kind of go on about your day. You never talk about, like, what you saw at all. And this gets into, like, let's actually explore some of the feelings that this film is bringing up, and how we can, like, it's not quite like movie therapy, the podcast movie therapy that we've talked about before, but I really like the way that you use movies to talk about explore our emotions and just can you just tell people a little bit about what they can expect from You Are Good? Is that right? Did I say it right?
Yes, you did. Yeah, thanks for saying all of that. The whole conceit of the show, I guess, like and you said it so well, is that I think most movie shows that have some bit of criticism or are hosted by people who fancy themselves critical are about one dynamic of the movie or a couple different dynamics in the movies. And what we found often gets left out is what feelings are evoked by watching the movie and what what we learn about ourselves through watching the movies. And so we're I'm not going to say we're acritical. We certainly have some stances, but we'll watch big budget teen movies from the late 90s as much as we'll watch like indie sleepers. And the whole point is to ultimately talk about ourselves and our relationship to our feelings and our relationship to the world by way of talking about the movie, because it's a hard sell to say, hey, let's, come listen to us and we'll talk about feelings and our relationship to the world. If it's about movies, that's a good entry for that sort of thing. So that's ultimately what we do.
And I looked a little bit at your back catalog as well, and there's some that you've covered that we've also covered. And you mentioned before we came on the air that you also had covered Misery some time ago. Where could people look to find that episode?
Yeah, just look. All of our episodes are available wherever your podcast listening happens. So it's in our back catalog. We have a Misery episode from I think about 2 years ago, as we were saying earlier. Because my co-host Sarah Marshall and I are such big and dynamic Stephen King fans. It's Stephen King fandom and Freddy Krueger fandom is how we met. So like that's it's important to us. And so as a result, our show is just about movies, but every time we do cover a Stephen King title, we will read the book as well and cover it in a page-to-screen format. So I feel extremely prepared for our conversation today. But yeah, you can find that and a number of other Stephen King-related chats. And again, all of those have a page-to-screen element in our back catalog, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And I had never read this book before. I had seen the movie, and so this was my first time reading the book. Margot D is the super fan. Like, she really knows the whole catalog much better than I do. I'm not the biggest, just in case you didn't know, I'm not the biggest like scary movie horror person. Like I get way too anxious.
Sure.
But I adore the writing of Stephen King. I just admire him so much as a writer, and he's really just a writer's writer, and I love him talking about writing, and I just think he's so great. And so anytime we get a chance to, so I'm very late coming to the Stephen King body of work, I guess is what I'm saying. Like I hadn't read Carrie before we did this podcast. And Margot, could you just give us a little bit of all this is to set up Margot D, who's really the Stephen King expert of the two of us.
I don't want to embarrass myself because they're going to be super fans that listen to this. I consider myself among them. I was just saying off the air, like sometimes when we get an author, it's like saying Shakespeare. They just have written so much, and there's so much about them that he is considered the king of horror. He was born September 21st, 1947. 76 years old. He's still with us, married to the same person, Tabitha Spruce, since 1969. He has been writing since his first book was Carrie, and he's never not been writing since then. He's famous for writing every single day. Even when he was in a hit-and-run accident, he was hit by a truck, and very similar to our Paul here, Sheldon, he had very serious injuries, and he still kept writing. His kids are writers. He is basically the face of Maine. And his films are constantly being adapted into so many things, including TV series. And I went back to watch Castle Rock again because we were covering this, because that has Annie in there. And there's also a play, and I don't know, Margot, if you saw the play. There's one of them is on YouTube.
I did see a little bit of the play. Yeah,
we love plays. Margot and I love like little local theaters that put on the plays, and they have that
or
there.
High schools. Oh, yes. We're all over it. Yeah, I'm going to sit through the whole high school production on YouTube. I sure am.
I recently saw a local regional production in the Bay Area of Oliver. And it was tremendous, and there's nothing that I'm about to say is any disrespect to the performance, but there was just some like truly surreal piece about the fabric of it being sort of like local, and like this is all to say, like, my heart is in community theater, and you never know exactly what you're going to get when you go there, and you just like are able to sort of like bask sometimes in the surreality of little kids playing old men with like and then also little kids in the next scene. I love it so much.
It's fantastic. But this novel comes out in 1987. I have my original copy in my hands. It's one of those books I brought, I took it home, and I read it in one fell swoop. I love this story, and she is... It's easy to talk about Stephen King scary villains like It, Randall Flagg. I think Annie Wikles is absolutely the most terrifying because she's a human being that is trained to help, and she's a psychopath, and she's got a lot of problems, and she has no problem literally mowing people down. We'll get to that scene in a second.
Wow, yeah. It's lots of differences between the book and the movie here. But Alex, tell us about how you met him. When you're in Maine, like, is it just like part of the backdrop?
Yeah, Stephen King is, you said earlier that like Stephen King's the face of Maine, and that's very true. If you say that you're from Maine, people will inevitably bring up Stephen King or Lobster or Lighthouses. Like that's the state brand. What Stephen King does really well, and I'm from an area of Maine that is represented in his it's like more of the like dairy kind of Maine. Like the Stephen King's Maine is like central Maine. It's not really ever coastal Maine, which is like what people think about when they think about Maine, or it's western Maine. It's like on the border of New Hampshire, which is somehow an even weirder state than Maine is. And I think like he does a really great job of like all of the great horror is tapping into something that's like very real and very like human and like very kind of like in the state. And everybody also loves him. Like he's a incredibly generous and giving person. I grew up in a town so he lived in Bangor and still has a house there. And my town that I grew up in was about 2 hours, 20 minutes south of Bangor, southwest. And we're so far away, but like he paid for a community ice skating rink in our town. Like every town has something that the Kings have contributed to it. As far as I know, extraordinarily giving, very lovely, very kind, very progressive, and has long been. And a lot of the horror that he taps on, like I said, is coming out of real events. It starts with a homophobic hate crime that actually happened in the state of Maine. So he was talking about these things and putting them in popular fiction before it was even sort of a thing that people were talking about on a popular level, and he helped do that. So I was at I spent my 20s in a pretty drunken haze, and it started fun and then wasn't towards the end, and I had to get that under control, and I did. Fortunately, I pursued help in fixing that. And I saw this is relevant because I saw Stephen King at a sandwich chain called Amato's. Anyone in Maine or New England will know that well. It was very funny because he was ordering his sandwich and it was obviously Stephen King. And it wasn't in a place where he is typically. It wasn't in like one of his towns. It was in another town. And I was watching the whole crew and I was like, are we just pretending this isn't Stephen King? Like, what are we? And then I was like, maybe I'm wrong. And they called up the sandwich order for Steve. And I was like, this is obviously Steve. Like, what are we doing? And so I tried to as casually as possible. And I was a columnist at that time for the Bangor paper. So there was at least like potentially some recognition. And I introduced myself as sort of benignly as I could and said, I just wanted to let you know that it was reading The Shining that helped me realize that I had a problem and that I needed to get it under control. And he goes, me too. And then, and that was kind and whatever. It was so nice and brief. And he asked what I was doing, asked who I was or whatever. He was on his way to go. He was overseeing some musical production in Boston that John Mellencamp was involved in. I can't quite recall what the details of that were. But I went
Scarecrow.
sort of on the yes.
Yeah.
And I went on the other side of the restaurant to go sit kind of by myself, completely out of view. And before he left, he came over to my table and shook my hand and was like, I just wanted you to know that it was like very nice to meet you. I hope that you have a great day. And then he left the restaurant on the other side of it. So he had to like make his way over to come and engage and then leave. And it was incredibly kind. I mean, I'm fortunate to have met many, 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 many lovely sort of notorious or well-known or incredible people that I admire. But that meeting in particular meant the world to me.
I'm just a little jealous. He has a book out called Holly that I've been starting.
Ooh.
And there's references to Trump in there, and then I'm in a couple like Stephen King Facebook groups, and some people are like, I don't want politics in my blah blah blah.
What, they never read The Dead Zone, which was ultimately about Trump before Trump even came around?
He's been writing politics. Yeah, Carrie's political. Everything.
These are radically. Every book is
right.
radically political. Every book.
You can't escape it, but yeah, it's so funny to be like, y'all have not been paying attention to him. I mean, just your example from it alone, yeah.
We did The Dead Zone, and it's eerie. And I mean, I know because like the history of the country is, huckster, soulless salesmen trying to get as much power as they possibly can. So it's like not necessarily hard to draw from. It's like in the DNA. But the character in The Dead Zone, in the book in particular, a little less so in the Cronenberg film, is Donald Trump. Like there is no, I mean, it's not because it predates, but it is.
But it is. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in the mid 70s you could see the future happening. And it's the white male grievance and all that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And even with regard to the shooting that you were talking about, the story he wrote. I mean, he wrote that short story Rage, which was ultimately about somebody sort of bottling up and spilling out. That people tried to bring him into saying that, was this irresponsible and help inspire Columbine? It's like, no, I'm just seeing. He's like an Octavia Butler. I'm just seeing what is happening, and I'm writing about it. And if you're horrified, you should be horrified because it's happening, not because I'm inspiring it. That's my soapbox. I'm done.
You fit in with us, trust me.
I'm so glad. This would have been very concerning if I got in and that was a weird tension that we had.
Can we please not just... Let's stick to the... I don't know what. Let's just stick to the stabbing. I don't know,
Let's stick to the thumbectomy or whatever you would call a removal.
Oh,
There's
gosh.
so much going on here. So the book is, let's just give the basic background. There's a writer named Paul Sheldon. He writes these romance novels. It's funny, I had a meeting, lunch with my editor this past week, and he works with a lot of romance writers, and he's like, that audience is very loyal. Like,
yeah,
it's not that off mark. He writes Misery Chastain, and it's those bodice rippers kind of stories, but he really wants to write something serious. So he has a whole thing where this, once again, 1987, he writes on a typewriter, and he goes to this hotel in Colorado. When he finishes, he has his champagne, his one cigarette, and then turns it in. No, it's not on a disc or anything like that. It's the actual paper. It's a whole thing that he does that he has to go through. It's a ritual. He's also has a drinking problem. He's divorced. He hints there's a little bit of self-loathing going on with this person that we're getting these hints of. He gets in this car accident, and he happens to be rescued by a nurse named Annie Wikles, who just happens to be his biggest fan of all time, loves Misery so much, and is helping him. And it's, like I said, it's during a storm. The phones aren't working. He's literally stuck with this woman. And she eventually gets him hooked on drugs, and she finds out that he is killing off the character that she loves so much, and she wants him to right that wrong. Literally, rewrite it. And so she makes him burn his manuscript for with the bad language, and she usually absolutely uses Cockadoodie as her swear word in the and just picking it up. Like they go back and forth with this. The cops try to find him. She kills one of them. She realizes that they're coming soon. They have this big kind of epic battle. she winds up dead. He winds up writing a better book than he ever could have. And he is hobbled. In the novel, she does a thumbectomy. She cuts his thumb off. She cuts the foot off
and
there.
serves it on a birthday cake.
On the birthday cake with the candle.
Okay. I had not read this book before.
And I forgot. So, I should have warned you.
First of all, let me just warn any of you who've not read the book. First of all, read it. It's a great book. He's a wonderful writer. He really, really is. I would not recommend. Don't read it over lunch. Don't read it anywhere near anything you ever want to eat again. One of the things that I did not anticipate that is so great about this book is when it opens, the accident has already happened. So I didn't know that, and so because I'd only seen the movie, and I love that. I think he's disoriented. This voice is kind of coming through the fog of his brain, and he can't quite make out what she's saying. And we're not sure, is he on pain meds yet or not? And again, I would say the biggest difference between the book and the movie is and I don't know why this wasn't in the movie more, but the whole thing about addiction, the whole thing, he doesn't really have to stay there. Like at many points where he could have gotten out, he's smart enough that he could figure his way out of there. He could talk his way out of there. He probably could have gotten his way out of there, except she has gotten him before he's kind of well enough to know what's going on. She's got him hooked on these. It's a fictional drug, but it's like a codeine kind of a thing, right?
It's an opiate. Yeah. We know more about opiate addiction now than we did back then.
True. This is very true.
But that's
it's important to state too, because there are some, I think, rightful criticisms about Stephen King sort of notoriously has self-image issues that manifest in fatphobic language in a lot of his books, and I think that is part of the description of Annie's villainy. But I think what is also important to keep in the context, that's true regardless, but what's important to keep in the context is she is his imagination of the human manifestation of his addiction to cocaine,
right?
And so knowing that she's like there's the addiction, there's the literal addiction of him having to take the pills, like in the book, and then just like in the movie, she is the personification of his being bound to cocaine, which is obviously so bad it leads to all the issues, but also led to his best book ever. So there's like just kind of a funny little twist.
Yeah, and it's a thing that's like born out of his fame.
Yes.
The kind of consequence of his fame, that now he has this relationship, this unbreakable relationship, that it's just so interesting. And it's not really in the movie at all. The movie is she's just an evil woman, and we don't quite get how evil she is, which is the whole interesting thing of it in and of itself. But I loved that about the book, that you don't know right from the get-go, like you don't know, is this guy sober or is he injured? He's obviously confused. He's in a fog, but what's the fog? What's causing the fog? And we know it's, unless I'm wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, this is just my first time reading this, we kind of know right off the bat that Annie is a wackadoo.
Yes.
Right? Like we never think, oh, she's maybe a little misguided, or maybe she doesn't get out much, but she's a nurse and she's trying to take care. Like we never really think that. We know, this is not good. She's got him hooked on this stuff already. And like, why does she have this stuff? Is that what I'm thinking, right? As a reader right away, like she's a woman in the woods and she's just got all this. How? I mean, we learn how later on, but as a reader, I'm like, okay.
So they tell it all from his point of view. That's the difference between that. So
yes, true.
He's an unreliable narrator for several reasons. But yeah, we're waking up with him kind of looking around and trying to make sense of the whole situation and trying to figure this woman out. And yeah, you're right about the fat phobic statements. He makes them quite a bit. And he tries to be better. as he moves on.
Yeah, Stephen brings his baggage. The other thing that I
Yes.
think, and I think that's all. And I'm not letting him off the hook, but I am a person who I'm sure has also said similar things that were absolutely rooted in my own insecurity about like how I am and look, etc. But the other thing that I feel like the greatest illustration of gender double standards across the board is if a woman wrote about men the same way Stephen King writes about scary mommies, they would be referred to as people who have daddy issues. Stephen King is defined by mommy issues. Like, he is defined by them. And this is like a little boy with mean mommy the whole time, but he never gets that moniker. So I just want to go on the record as saying Stephen King has mommy issues. That's it.
He was not raised with a father. His mother took care of him and his brother, and they were also very, very poor when he was growing up. And so for him to become a successful writer, I think he made like $10,000 a year. He worked at a laundromat and was a teacher, and his wife worked at a truck stop or something. And then all of a sudden they were multimillionaires. And then everything he put out made money. And I'm sure that must have...
It could have felt like a trap, like he talks about a lot here too. Yeah.
Well, he's always asked, like, where do you get your ideas? And he hates that question. But at the same time, like, he has such bizarre ideas. Like, it's kind of hard to, but he had some sort of, this is like he was at an airport or something, and this idea came into his head. What if you woke up and your biggest fan? Because also having, you're pretty famous, Alex. Like, I'm sure you have big fans that, like, parasocial relationship.
Right. This is, I think, and I could be wrong, although I just saw a video of Bruce Springsteen talking about, and I can't remember what he was talking about, but he was talking about seeing an early Woody Allen movie. And I looked up what the movie was, and he was talking about how Woody Allen in the movie wasn't kind to his fans. And ultimately it was about someone who felt trapped by the expectation of fans. They tried to make something else. And that was in 82. But this feels like one of the first, it's metaphorical, but it feels like it's one of the first on point long-term discussions of parasociality. And about feeling trapped by that. And I'm of any of the shows I work on, and any of the people I work with or whatever, I'm the least known person. And I've had really scary interactions with fans. Really overreaching, well-intended, and that's the worst part sometimes because they can't see. Well-intended, overreaching, boundary crossing, scary, aggressive, like all of those things. And then, like I said, I'm the least known, and I'm a man. Yeah. And the people I know who are women who have any sort of recognition, I filter for a lot of colleagues. I filter their communication and correspondence so that they don't get a lot of sort of what comes in. Not because it's necessarily, because some of it is creepy, but sometimes it's the Annie Wikles #1 fan language that's the scariest, because there's something about how it's articulated where they're not overtly asking for anything, but it seems like they're expecting something. And Annie is the best, truly a tremendous representation of that phenomenon, or how that phenomenon feels.
Yeah. And when she comes across so sweet and so solicitous, and she just loves him so much, and she just wants what's best for him. But then when she's upset, it's when the wackiness comes out. And as I said, like, she blowtorches him. She cuts off his thumb because he dares cross her.
Okay, the thing with the rat.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
He's in the basement.
Yeah.
No, thank you. No, thank you. That's the Stephen King of it, though, by the way. Like,
yeah,
if you're ever doubting, like, you're reading a Stephen King story, something like that, and he can make it gruesome. But
yeah, I know. I think I was having lunch when I read that particular scene with the rat, and I was like, I knew. What, did I forget? I was reading a Stephen King book. Like, what was I thinking? This is not the time to read this book.
Oh my god! The other thing that I think is, and you probably were already going to bring this up, but the thing that I think is worth mentioning that for anyone who has not read this book or has only seen the movie, is this book is very long because there are 2 books in it. Like, the book.
That's a very good point.
The book is a framing narrative for the book that he's writing, which we read in real time. And to be honest, sometimes I'm like, I don't need this. I honestly don't need this much of a view about what your pretend romance novel would be. But I love it. I love that he did that. If I found out that he was on cocaine while he was writing this criticism of his cocaine addiction, I would not be surprised, because it feels like a thing that in my most, tooted eras, I would have tried to write a book at the same time I'm writing another book. So I appreciate it. But yeah, there's a whole ass part of this book that is the book that he's writing.
That's very true. And we just recently did, earlier this month, we did Follow the House of Usher, which is very much what what is he called? Misery's Return. Is that the name of the book that he's writing in the cabin? Misery's Return is very Follow the House of Usher-esque. Many similar kind of tropes and turns of phrase and whatnot. And I agree. It's long. It's a whole ass book.
There are some times too, because his whole thing is that he's written a book called, I think, like the Car Thief or something, Car Thieves or something.
Something about a car, yeah.
And he's like, finally, I've written like seriously capital L literature. And obviously the tragedy of that is that he only has one copy because of his rituals, and she has him burn it, which is like even worse. It's like cut off your own flesh situation. And my joke to myself running every time I read this book is imagining that like the car thief isn't very good. Like he thinks that it's good, but like anytime we read passages of that, I'm like, I thought that too.
I'm not blown away.
No, I think, and honestly, I think that's part of the way he deals with the situation. And he's like, she actually made me a better writer. And maybe that's the one thing he could take from it that's positive. I think she made him a better writer. Like, she just kind of like, no, you're better than this. This is crap. Keep going.
Absolutely. Well, the thing that speaks to the relationship with like a stimulant addiction is he says at some point that like in his best output prior to being essentially captive to Annie, he'd do 2 to 3 pages a day, and under the Annie jurisdiction or under Annie's rule, he does 12 pages a day. So he's absolutely performing at a different level than he is when he's not under Annie's thumb.
And I like the very end, we'll give it away a little bit, but that he's still struggling with painkillers and addiction. He comes home afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
He does publish Misery Kills or whatever, Misery Returns, and it does really well. But he's now like, I want to write something else, and they're throwing money at him to write about his experience, and he's like, I'm not there yet. Nope. And so then he becomes inspired by something he sees as a kid with a skunk in the shopping cart or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then he comes back to his apartment. He starts thinking of ideas, and he's so excited because he's got the germ of an idea going, and he's got that thrill back. And I think like that in a weird way, she made him a better writer. But yeah, he comes with a lot of trauma.
I love in the movie we have Lauren Bacall as his agent, and she's like, I'd be, you know, I have to ask, will you write the book? And then she's like, I thought you were over it. And I can't imagine a more late 80s, early 90s assessment of mental health than like, you were so horribly a captive, you were maimed. And I was under the impression that you were over it by now.
His daughter didn't know where he was. She didn't know. Like, they assumed he was dead for some time. Like,
the news conference in the movie where they present the situation where he might be, and then they're like, that is if animals didn't get him, which very well might be the case. And I was like, whoa, inappropriate.
The book is so much darker than the movie ever is. And for better or for worse, there's good. But there's this whole thing in the movie. First of all, is it 2 or 3 police officers? She kills the first one.
And then there's 2.
And then there's these 2 guys, right? And I don't remember if she kills one of them, but they come back anyway. There's a whole thing with that. But also, like when Paul he sends her away to get the paper or whatever, and he finds her quote unquote scrapbook, It's so much darker than it is in the movie. In the movie, it's just like, oh, it's all this stuff about the babies. But in the scrapbook, in the book, like we're led to believe she's killed her, I think her father and her college roommate. And it's like on and on and on. It's much more, it goes back a lot earlier. She's a little girl. Like the first murder that's in her, or the first death that we kind of grow to believe is a murder, happens when she's a little girl. I think it's one of her parents, and she's keeping a scrapbook, mementos of these crimes,
which is what a serial killer does, by the way.
Exactly. So yeah, she's much. It's such a more darker, farther back, more twisted. As I said, unlike in the movie. She never seems harmless. There's not a one line of the book where we think, okay, she might just be a little weird. But she's probably harm. You never think that. She's
it's unnerving.
Already causing him harm. Like the first sentence of the book, he's already being very seriously harmed by this person. Yeah, there's just it's way more violent. It's a lot of, I was surprised. I don't know why. I was surprised because we were talking last week was it last week we were talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer? Mm-hmm. And we were talking about how in that era of cinema, when we kind of had this coming back to horror, one of the things, the kind of the Wes Craven thing was the quickly kill the person for no reason, out of nowhere, and these killings happening really quickly, kind of one on top of the other before you have time to process, like, why that guy? This kind of has that element as well of her violence starts escalating, and there's no logic, really. She really could play it cool with the police officer and get him out of there, but she doesn't.
No, she goes on her lawnmower, and that image in my head will not go away. It's pretty gruesome.
It's horrendous.
My presumption on Annie, because I love her, is I'm not necessarily a champion of her, but I do love her. Is I imagine, because we also have some other stuff that I would offer just caveats on, is we have, and speaking about sort of late 80s, early 90s mental health stuff, the descriptions and like diagnosis of Annie are a little irresponsible in the book, because he's going based on some research, like Paul is going based on some research he did, and he's going on very broad definitions of like manic depression, and where manic depression crosses over into psychopathy. Again, like our narrator's in a drug haze, like it's not incredibly clear. I think Stephen King that we know today now would probably be a bit more cautious about that sort of thing based on the sort of the conversation that we've had, and not try to diagnose somebody. That said, I get the sense of with Annie there is a personality disorder that seems, based on our knowing the history of what's in the scrapbook, that seems rooted in some abuse by the hands of a male when she was a child, because she only kills men. She also she kills a lot of babies.
A lot of babies. Yeah. And her own daughter, by the way. Spoiler for Castle Rock.
She kills the nursing school roommate.
She kills, yes, but she primarily, like, she starts with her dad, and then a husband, and then a lover, like, and then she says at some point that like the only champion that she has in her life was her mother, who died 20 years ago. And I'm imagining there was like some sort of break that happened early from something. Because I actually don't find psychopaths interesting, because they're essentially like the Terminator, it's like it's like kind of like a machine operating on like a different reality. I like, and maybe I'm giving too much of the benefit of the doubt, but I like to imagine that there was some sort of thing that kicked things off, because that's the world we live in. The world we live in is a lot of people are rooted in more or less the reality, but sometimes operate outside of it in a way that we should find scary.
I think that's fair, though, because her violence although, as I said, it does, especially as the book progresses, like it does kind of come in this like riptide. It gets more and more, the incidents happen more and more close together. But like, for instance, just with Paul, as violent as she is, and she's got him drug addicted, all of that, she wants something from him.
Yes.
She definitely wants something from him. And each of her violent acts is because she's trying to get something out of him, even if it's just for that reason, even if it's just kind of as a transactional thing. If that's not like a psychopathic, I don't think, I'm armchairing here, but that's not just the like killing machine, just causing destruction wherever you go. She's trying to get something out of this guy.
Well, she also has feelings. She's not like a cold, unfeeling, not empathetic person. Like that's what makes her scary. Because like, for example, with the killing of the kids, like she's not like, I want dead kids. Everything she does comes from her impression that she's helping you out. And that's the scariest thing. Like truly the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The people who scared me the most are people who believe in their heart of hearts that they're doing me a favor by contacting me in a very specific way. And yeah, I mean, she could be a psychopath, that's fine if that's the case with her. But to me, it's much more interesting. And again, this is one of the things that feels rooted in Maine. And obviously it's a universal experience, is a lot of the monstrousness doesn't look like a monster. It looks like people that are absolutely seemingly normal, have respectable jobs, whatever. And to speak to that, a sort of undercurrent of what's going on in Maine, I was always surprised to find out that people find it like a pristine sort of postcard-like place. Because when I was growing up, the town I grew up in, I remember there was at least one incident where a local guy who theoretically was a drug informant was killed by a biker gang and his tongue was cut out and his body was found.
Oh my God.
And everyone knew who did it. And no one told any authorities who did it, but it was just like an open secret. You knew that is a thing that could happen. It was like sort of like part of the vibe of the area, all while having like a lovely apple festival in September, and like a nice agricultural fair. But also, if you were a drug informant, a biker gang's going to cut your tongue out and throw you in a ditch. And that's like, that's what Stephen King is tapping into.
Well, you could like the mob is like that. Like any gang has that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And he's speaking, those are his forces. But yeah, I for whatever reason, the more I engage this, the more I read it, the more I have I don't want to go on a camping trip with Annie. I don't want to go on a candlelit dinner with Annie, but I have a lot more. Benefit of the doubt isn't right. I just think that there's more going on than she's a killing machine.
We're going to play the original trailer here, and then we will talk about this 1990, I think one of Rob Reiner's best movies, in my opinion.
For sure.
You almost died. You have a compound fracture of the tibia in both legs, and the fibula in the right leg is fractured too. And as soon as the road's open, I'll take you to a hospital. In the meantime, you've got a lot of recovering to do. There is nothing to worry about. You're gonna be just fine. I'm your #1 fan. My name is Annie Wikles.
I think one of my clients, Paul Sheldon, might be in some kind of trouble.
You mean Paul Sheldon, the writer? Well, everybody sure likes those misery books.
They had it at the store, Paul.
They said he checked out last Tuesday. Isn't that a little strange?
I guess it was kind of a miracle you finding me.
In a way, I was following you.
You were following me.
Oh, Paul, I've read everything of yours, but the misery novels. You must be a good man, or you could never have created such a wondrous, loving creature as Misery Chastain.
Very kind.
The presumption must now be that Paul Sheldon is dead.
You dirty bird. How could you? Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
Misery Spirit is still alive.
I don't want her spirit! I want her! And you murdered her!
You don't think he's dead, do you?
Don't even think about anybody coming for you, because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here. And you better hope nothing happens to me. Because if I die, you die. I know you've been out. Is this what you're looking for? Eventually, you'll come to accept the idea of being here.
Annie, whatever you're thinking about doing, please don't do it. Annie, for God's...
Shh, darling. Trust me.
God's sake.
It's for the best. God, I love you.
I don't know if y'all remember When Harry Met Sally, but there's a scene where Billy Crystal is reading Misery, and he reads like the last page first. That's the whole thing about Harry, is that he needs to find out what happened in case he dies before the book ends. And that's because Rob Reiner. Yeah, Rob Reiner directed that movie. Rob Reiner directing this movie. And we have, I mean, just talk about the people involved. William Goldman does the script. Barry Sonnenfeld is the cinematographer. Mark Sheeman does the music.
It's wild.
It's wild.
And do you ever think about, have you ever thought about the fact, so like you mentioned Stand By Me earlier. Stand By Me takes place in Castle Rock. Rob Reiner names his production company Castle Rock based on the success of that movie. Castle Rock then is responsible for making Seinfeld possible. So if you think about like all of the things that this collaboration between Stephen King and Rob Reiner, not just made on screen and to the point of like, you know, Sonnenfeld is a cinematographer, like it's an incredible crew, but like then what was made possible by the success of these series is the 90s. The 90s was made
basically,
possible.
Yes.
Based on this.
Stand By Me, I think for people who weren't Stephen King fans, it completely changed them and turned them around on his writing. Because before that, it was just, oh, he's the Cujo guy, he's the Carrie guy. It's all blood.
Firestarter, was that what that was that called? The
Drew Barrymore, excellent one. So this is Rob Reiner directs this, and here we have a little bit more of Paul in his, flat or his hotel room. Lauren Bacall's, I mean, just the classiness of this production. I mean, Francis Sternhagen and Richard Farnsworth.
I know.
So good. That's such a good, that as an addition. That Goldwyn, that's a, who'd you say originally? William
Goldman. All the President's Men, and
that addition of the
Princess
relationship between the cop and the quote secretary who is his wife.
Right.
Absolutely brilliant, tremendous. Oh, so good.
You never often see people at this age seen as being so wise and with it and on top of things. There's always old people jokes. Yes. But they're all like, oh, I can't move. I can't remember anything, blah, blah, blah. These two, like,
she tries to give him a hand job in the cop car. Like, that's an important, that's amazing.
It is. And then he when he goes down and he just goes charging down into the ravine, looking for he figures the whole thing out. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. There's so many things in this movie that were just not in the book at all, that I really love. I get why we're not playing up the addiction lens of the story here so much. I think partly because it's such an internal part of the character. That's kind of a hard thing to show in dialogue even, or he'd have to have voiceover. I get it. We're showing, not telling. And so then if you're going to show and not tell, then you do have to have an Annie. It has to be a little bit of a slightly different Annie. I love that we get to see, which we don't see at all in the book until pretty far in, that Paul is, as you say, he's writing this book because he feels trapped by he's not a struggling artist. We see him when we meet Paul, he's got a literal bottle of Dom Perignon on ice waiting for him. That's how convinced he is that this is a masterpiece of this thing that he's typing away at the fancy hotel in Colorado. In the book, there's a little reference to The Shining.
The Shining house, yeah.
Yeah.
He puts
they're in his fourth location. So he has like 3 typical locations in Maine and has a little, sometimes he wants to get away and he goes to Colorado.
Yeah, because that's totally different from Maine. Got to get away from all those trees and snow.
It's so funny you say that. I have never thought of that. That it's like, it's just the environment he knows in a different state.
Isn't that weird?
I had friends that got married at the Shining Hotel, the one up in Oregon. Yeah. And they were married like a couple weeks before. They had a goth wedding, of course.
Of course. That's great.
And it was like October 10th or whatever. And that it's such a massive snowstorm, like to get people up the mountain and in there was like being in the movie. And they said it was. I know.
Wow.
That's exciting
I wanted
for me.
A spooky wedding, but not like this. It reminded me. I was in Las Vegas this one time, and in the Venetian. I don't know if you've ever been to the Venetian in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And it has the fountains, and it has, when you're inside, it's one of those, like, it's inside, but it feels like you're outside, but you have no sense of time, or there's no windows or anything. And it has a canal that goes through it, and people ride gondolas indoors, and you go under the bridges, and just like Venice. Having lunch at a restaurant and heard this gentleman in the table next to us trying to communicate with the waiter, who just, some guy who lived in Las Vegas, trying to communicate and place his order in Italian. And like, as we're kind of eavesdropping and realizing, like, this guy doesn't speak English. He's really Italian. And so we turned and like, and we did, because we speak a little bit of Italian, and we did a little bit of interpretation, and like at least got his order in. And we're like, why are you here? Like, what? You're in Las Vegas. You could have a medieval feast if you wanted. You could go to in a proto-Egyptian temple. You could, all of these things, and you're here. And he's like, yeah, I wanted pasta, basically.
I love it.
And so, I thought that. And I'm like, you go to Colorado? Okay.
It's so funny.
Right.
There's something about like I say this with a love. I have so much love for a lot about this country, not always the country itself, but so much love for it. And I think that there's something attractive about the grotesque nature of the country, like the country that people are drawn to, that they're like, this is what you guys do. Vegas is a perfect example of that. Or like, yes. People are just like, interesting. All right. Good to know.
Well, yes. Living in California, we get a lot of that, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
I have wanted my whole life to live in LA, specifically because I know how weird it is. It's the weirdest place on earth. Every day, a new weird thing I didn't know was possible happens. And it's not for the faint of heart. And I love it.
We stayed. I was just saying before we got on the that I just came from. I actually drove back down yesterday. I was in Los Angeles with Todd for a couple of days, and our hotel right next to. And we didn't end up going only because I knew they serve a lot of food, and I wasn't up for like a giant dinner. But we were staying right next to the Northwoods Inn. Have you ever gone to the Northwoods Inn?
Yeah. Yes.
Which we used to go there when I was a kid. So you just to set the scene, because it was so funny because I was just finishing up Misery. But it's right now it's 72 degrees here in Southern California, and I'm in the hotel swimming. We're swimming. That's how warm it is. And right next to us is a log cabin with like evergreen trees covered in snow in 70 whatever degrees. And it's this restaurant. There's a couple of them, but this was the original one. Yeah, you go in and you're like, it's like a log cabin. And I don't know what era, mid-century, mid-20th century. And we get to play at it being a wintry, snowy log cabin. It's weird. Americans are so weird.
I love it. It's so bizarre.
But it makes for a great backdrop for the film.
Yes.
You know, the starkness of the snow and the height of the trees. And when he's bleeding, his car flips over and he's bleeding. And then she pulls him and grabs him, you know, fireman style, like just drags him. You wonder, like, what does this person
and then
look
you're
like?
This sheet, who is this?
Who's this shape?
Who's this strong man? Because you don't know that necessarily that it's a woman. Who is this shape? I love too the scene that, so we establish, as I said, that he's a very not struggling writer. He's got an agent who's Lauren Bacall. He celebrates. He's so confident in his gift that he celebrates with his Dom Perignon and his single cigarette. And he's riding his what is it? A Mustang?
65 Mustang.
As a Mainer, this is, and I say this in our other.
Was that a thing?
My biggest beef is, and this guy's ultimately they say he's from Worcester. He talks about being from Malden. He's from the North Shore of Massachusetts.
Uh-huh.
Nobody would go out into a storm going downhill in a vintage
Mustang. True that.
I cringe every time I see it. And he's not just doing it, he's driving like you imagine James Caan would drive. Like he's like,
Malibu. Yeah.
Sonny
like,
Corleone. Does that? Who cares?
Whatever's coming, you have it coming.
Yeah, you do have it coming too. Yeah.
In the book,
Santa
he's
Cruz
drunk.
Mountains and like how twisty that is. Yeah.
You know to not do that. Although I will say, and I say that like a jerk, but I was living in closer to the Bay Area earlier, and I was in my podcast partner Sarah is up in Portland, Oregon. I drive back and forth to see her here and there, and I didn't know that you go over an active volcano that is blizzard prone. And I drove up it in my 2017 Mazda 5.
Oh, no.
And just had to be in, is it Mount Hood? It's not Mount Hood. I don't know what the mountain is that you ultimately go over.
Shasta?
But you go, Shasta, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just on Mount Shasta for 3 days at a hotel because
we got stuck on Mount Shasta one time driving up to
because you're like, what's the worst? Because like 4/5 of the mountain, you're like, what's so bad? And suddenly you are in a like whiteout. So I take it back, Paul. Now that I've gone through that, I feel like I could be empathetic.
Paul's got a lot of arrogance. Paul's got a lot of confidence.
Well, what I love, and this is not in the book at all, this wonderful little Paul Reiner touches. So he's driving his Mustang in the slippy snow, so much snow. He's swerving. He's starting to swerve. And his precious book, which is on the seat, starts to fall, which is in a folio. You know, it's not like it's just loose, you know, and like, okay, you didn't make a copy. You also didn't bring any binder clips or anything. Okay.
A trapper keeper.
Yeah, it starts to like trapper keeper. It starts to like slip off the car seat, and he's like, "Oh!" And he reaches over, and that's how he goes off the road. Is he's reaching for his manuscript to keep it from falling off of the car seat onto the floor in the folio.
Which I will say, masterpiece. Albert Brooks, who is Rob Reiner's best friend, his movie Defending Your Life starts in exactly the same way. He gets a new CD player that they kind of hoist on him, and he's trying to like put the CD in, and he essentially dies of distracted driving, not unlike this is what Paul's situation is. And I love that. I don't know if it was pulled because we don't necessarily get that in the book, but it feels like Defending Your Life had come out so close to when this had happened that I'm curious if it was a nod to Albert Brooks.
I also think just a lot of people I was a smoker back in the day, and smoking and driving was like my favorite thing in the world. And when the cigarette falls through your yes. And did that stop me? No.
I don't. My father died of lung cancer. I get it. It's real. But very occasionally, if I'm going to a party, I'm smoking in the car. And I last night was just telling someone about this, as I was like, people used to do this all the time, but once in a while, you drop it in your crotch and risk everyone's life.
Or under the seat, you know, and
because you don't want your car to catch on fire.
So I get it why the accident and I've been in car accidents. They just happen. I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
But with the movie, it's so brilliant because this shape picks him up, throws him in. He wakes up, and then you see the sweetest face you've ever seen, which is Kathy Bates. She looks angelic to me, like when you first see her. She's so innocent.
She really does. I love that. I love that about the movie, and that's not in the book at all, as I said. But the casting, first of all, that it's James Caan. Like, we didn't even talk about the fact that it's James Caan.
It's
funny.
So, what do you make of that casting decision? Like, what was your take on it being James Caan?
There were a lot of people who they offered it to, but I get this too. A lot of guys are like, I don't want to be stuck in a bed and have some lady yelling at me. She's going to get all the attention. And James Caan turned down so many great parts throughout his life that it was the one time somebody was able to talk him into it. Yeah, I think a lot of actors are very egotistical and wouldn't want to play a person that's beat up that way.
But I think I think what's genius about it being James Caan is we think of James Caan, especially at that point. Yeah, James Caan is a tough guy. When Sonny goes after his brother-in-law in The Godfather, and he's, again, talk about a machine.
And he really beat that guy up too.
He really beat that guy up.
He really hated him.
He is just like, he is like the Terminator. He is unstoppable. He's going to beat this guy to a pulp. And so to have it be, you can't not have, as an audience, as an American audience, you can't not have that in your mind. And so to have that kind of, plus James Caan himself, James Caan at the Playboy Mansion, James Caan at Studio 54, like James Caan was the man. And then to have that guy, he's the Dom Perignon, as I said, with the cigarette, and now he's at the complete mercy of this woman. Yeah. Brilliant.
I know I'm only 40 pages into your book, but...
Well, what?
Nothing.
No. What is it?
It's ridiculous. Who am I to make a criticism to someone like you?
It's all right, I can take it.
Well, it's brilliantly written, but then everything you write is brilliant.
Pretty rough stuff.
The swearing, Paul. There, I said it.
The profanity bothers you.
It has no nobility.
These are slum kids. I was a slum kid. Everybody talks like that.
They do not. What do you think I say when I go to the feed store in town? Oh, now, Wally, give me a bag of that effing pig feed and 10 pounds that bitchly cow corn. And in the bank, do I tell Mrs. Bollinger, oh, here's one big bastard of a check. Give me some of your Christing money. There, look there. See what you made me do? Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, sometimes I get so worked up. Can you ever forgive me?
It's fine.
I love you, Paul. Your mind, your creativity. That's all I meant.
But that's what makes it great. And their interactions, he's just like, at first she's very obsequious around, like, oh, Paul, I love you so much. You're my favorite. I couldn't possibly, read your work. And then she reads, and I like the scene where she's basically like, it's the language, Paul. And Paul's kind of be like, oh, well, that's how people talk. He's from several different places, because sometimes he sounds like he's from the Bronx, and sometimes this
character is from Worcester, and what I appreciate, I will take someone who is from a place and knows they can't do the accent and just doesn't.
Right.
And he saved us from not going too hard. He was like, I'm James Caan. What do you want me to do?
But their interactions are great. I mean, I think, and also we were saying off the air, like, I had an accident a few years ago. I fell down a flight of stairs and I broke my ankle, and it was very triggering to see the condition. When you see his feet and his legs and they're in that, I mean,
it's
oh my God. It's brutal.
It's brutal.
It's worse than like a slasher film. That's like, it's so much, but you feel like, oh, I bet this guy is in a lot of pain. And I bet, he's thinking in his head, am I ever going to walk again? What is it going to look like? Because how is he going to get out of there?
But he's also, and this is again a Reiner touch, which I think is really great, not in the book at all. These little moments of levity. Paul in the book is either too much in pain or too under the influence of painkillers, or both, to be really thinking straight. He tries, when he has like lucid moments in the book, he tries to say what he knows Annie wants to hear. He tries to charm her. He's not that great at it because the pain and the drugs are at war in his body. And so he kind of he can't kind of follow through with that in any kind of way that's getting him out of the situation. But James Caan's character in the movie is just like, dude, do you see her legs? She's asking you to burn the book. Burn the book. You were the one who was stupid enough not to make a copy. You're some great genius who with the masterpiece, and you can't write another. You didn't make a copy, or two, you can't write it again. Do you not realize your life is at stake? Burn the book. Tell her you're bringing Misery back. Why are you arguing with her? Yes. Just do what she says.
But that's part of his arrogance, and it's part of his...
Exactly. I love
he's
that.
used to
I
that.
love that choice of that.
Yeah, and so he's pushing back with her. I love the pig that comes up, that gets to meet Misery. The pig. But when she finally cracks, when she reads Misery's last book, she didn't realize it was going to be his last book. And when she wakes him up in the middle of the night, it's like one of the most terrifying things you can imagine. And that's when he has to then write something for her.
You dirty bird. How could you? She can't be dead. Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
Annie, in 1871, women often died in childbirth. But her spirit is the important thing, and Misery's spirit is still alive.
I don't want her spirit! I want her! And you murdered her!
No, I didn't.
Who did?
No one. She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away? Slipped away? She didn't just slip away! You did it! 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 You murdered my Misery!
Annie!
I thought you were good, Paul. But you're not good. You're just another lying old dirty birdie. And I don't think I better be around you for a while. And don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family. Because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here. And you better hope nothing happens to me. Because if I die, you die.
And it changes him. And then I love that it's interspersed with Richard Farnsworth and Frances Sternhagen, that we have.
So
we go back and forth, and also having Lauren Bacall have a talk with Richard Farnsworth. It just sort of like breaks up that tension a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. I like the thing that we don't, because you made the point earlier, Margot D, that this all in the book happens from his perspective, so we can only get what he knows. And in the movie, we have a little bit more of a wide lens. We have the director's view. And what resonated, again, what resonated with regard to like the events in Maine is I was paying close attention. I sort of knew people who were involved. Like it's my state. It's a small state, so I was paying a lot of attention. And one thing that I think will be unpacked for quite a while was how the police responded in this situation, and like what has become kind of evident with regard to police and mass shooting events in particular is they are especially good at finding the body of a mass shooter who has shot themselves, but anything short of that, they're not equipped for. It's not what they do. It's very difficult for them to kind of handle, especially when there's like more than 3 involved and you're dealing with like coordination, et cetera. And so days went by of this person who was missing when it turns out it's very likely like right after the shooting, he went to his place of work and killed himself. Sorry, I should have given a trigger warning for that, but that's the deal. Yeah. What we saw that in this movie, which wasn't about a mass shooting, but it was about like they have all these police force involved who are trying to figure out what's going on. There's like all of these people. There's a lack of coordination, and as a result, they come to a very bad assessment of where Paul ultimately is. And the one cop who is like actually like from the area, knows how things work, kind of knows who the people are, is the one who has any real sense about what's going on. It's Paul's like only hope. It's like police as an entity, as a larger entity, not always great at crime solving for sure, but sometimes you have like individuals who get sort of all of the who take an interest and understand the context, and those are really kind of the people who are able to get the job done, and that's who we have in this police officer. And I'm so glad that we got not just a cop who was the hero to Paul ultimately, but we got their personality and their character and what they're like and what their relationship with their wife is like, without also ever going like, why should I care about this guy? Like sometimes you get too much fleshing out and you're like, is this movie about this person? It's just a perfect balance of giving someone color and flavor without tipping the scale about who the movie's ultimately about.
When I was in college, I had a professor who was like a real know-it-all, and we were talking about Halloween movies to watch at Halloween, and someone brought up Misery, and he was like, I saw that movie once. When they kill Richard Farnsworth, that was too far. That was too... he was so upset. We're like, it's a Stephen King movie. It's going to be a horror. You're going to lose somebody that you like. It's just...
That's so funny.
It's just, there's so many great decisions, just like with Stand By Me. And I totally get why, if you're talking about adapting this particular writer's work, and you look at just Stand By Me versus Firestarter, which director is he going to choose? Of course, Stand By Me is such a brilliant movie and it is a horror film, but the horror happens not at the moment of them actually finding the kid's body and seeing the kid's body. That's not the scariest, most disturbing part of the movie. It's what's happening in each of these boys' lives, and then on top of that, you have their real friendship at this very important time in their lives, and yeah, he just got that in such a great way, and again, showing, not telling. Mm-hmm. A lot of, I think if you talk about like Firestarter is showing and telling. And I remember seeing Cujo in the movie theater when I was a kid, and I was like, but when you have a book, and I can also see like reading Misery, which again is all from Paul's perspective, like how do you shoot that story in that way? You can't. Mm-hmm. So you need to have somebody who really is gonna have that, be able to get that distance on the story, but not lose the heart of it and not lose the humanity of all of the characters, including Annie.
Yeah.
Because you have that. Yeah. You have those feelings for Annie, like you were just talking about.
It's two of the letters of my favorite nurse's name, Annie.
You fooler. Did I do good?
You did great. There is just one little thing. I can't work on this paper. See, it's crassable bond and it smudges. So I thought maybe if you went back into town, you could bring me some white long-grain Mimeo.
But mine costs the most, so I don't see how it can smudge.
Come here, I'll show you.
It does smudge after all. Isn't that fascinating?
I thought you'd be interested. I'd like for you to be in on everything, Annie, not just the finished book, but how it's written.
Thank you for thinking of me. Anything else I can get while I'm in town? Any other crucial requirements that need satisfying? Would you like a tiny tape recorder? Or how about a handmade set of writing slippers?
Well, just the paper will be fine.
Are you sure? Because if you want, I'll bring back the whole store for you.
Annie, what's the matter?
What's the matter? I'll tell you what's the matter. I go out of my way for you. I do everything to try and make you happy. I feed you, I clean you, I dress you, and what thanks do I get? Oh, you bought the wrong paper, Annie. I can't write on this paper, Annie. Well, I'll get your stupid paper, but you just better start showing me a little more appreciation around here, Mr. Man.
So, Alex, when you covered this movie on your podcast, how did that conversation go?
Well, I think we've touched on a lot of this, which is I think Stephen King's strength is that first and foremost, the horror is rooted in human relationships, and everything else is set dressing or metaphor, or are used to create circumstances for those humans that we know about their relationships to react to and against, and then to see how that helps shape. And I think that's why he ends up transcending horror. I love Clive Barker. Mm-hmm. Clive Barker, this is going to be potentially sacrilegious, I don't think is especially good at human relationships. I don't know about him, but his on the page, sometimes I'm like, do you know people? Like, do you have friends? And I think that's where it's sort of there's a fail. But Clive Barker is incredibly good at describing the macabre and what that's like, and world building and all of that sort of thing. The reason I think Stephen King had a future beyond Cujo, or beyond any sort of anything, and going back to his origins, they're about the messiness of being a person. Is there a more sensitive book about a woman written by a man than Carrie? Like, it's wild that he was able to pull that off, particularly again as a person who was working sort of who this was his third job, was being a writer, and was able to sort of pull that off in the way that he did. So I just think that, that this is what Sarah and I love about him, is this is ultimately a person who is good at people first, and then everything else is kind of there for you to react and respond against. And they're all things that are relatable. Substance use disorder, or relationships with overbearing parents. The horrors in it are kids who are not acknowledged by adults, or worse, are the victims of adult predators. These are all things that are extremely resonant. You're speaking to, regardless of how you feel about a killer clown that comes back every 27 years, or Fairy Tale last year. Loved it. And there's so many fantastic elements about it. But what is that book about but aging, not wanting to see your dog die? I mean, these are all incredibly human experiences. And I think that is the key to his endurance as someone who, some people, and I'm not this person, because I was saying earlier, I saw your list and was in awe. I read at least 100 to 120 books a year. I'm a reader. I can't keep up with Stephen King. Right. I can't believe he does what he does. It feels, as a person who says that he is no longer on cocaine, I can't believe he does what he does. But he does it so well, and people keep returning, and some people buy every book because even if they think that it's the horror that they're appealing to, he is speaking to their humanity.
That's really well put. I always say, the clown is not the real scary part of it. It's Beverly's father. It's, it's the humans. Yeah. And it's Annie herself, and Annie's demons are what we're terrified of. And that's.
Yes. Well, and another great, the Stephen King of cinema, as far as I'm concerned, is Wes Craven. And the reason I think that is all of his horror is human horror. I mean, even Nightmare on Elm Street, at the end of the day, is obviously about a child predator who comes back and is sort of a demonic dream god or whatever. But he was created because of parent vigilantism. He was created because, and he was like able to kill in the way he was able to because parents and adults didn't take children seriously. Like, it's very much a book about kids sort of being abandoned by the people who are supposed to look after them, and then who fills that gap. I think that's what horror needs. One of my recent favorite horror movies is Hereditary, which I think a lot of people were upset with because they think, not to give anything away, but it feels like it's going to be one thing and then kind of it has a supernatural turn, and some people had feelings about that. But my take is like the supernaturality is metaphor. I don't even care about it. It's about being haunted by family trauma. It's about being haunted by, the prior generation not stopping the spell, so to speak, so that you get it on you yourself. I think that's just what works especially well, and that's what Rob Reiner. That's what Rob Reiner.
Oh yeah,
I would
Paul
love
Reiner
to see,
earlier.
I would love to see this movie. This movie directed by Carl Reiner, who I think prior to Misery had made Summer School, so I don't think it would have been a great movie. But the
I love Summer School, by the way.
I love Summer School too.
Dave and Chainsaw, are you kidding?
That's the reason I'm a horror fan. Summer School, Dave and Chainsaw are the reasons I'm a horror fan. So I feel it for sure. But I just think that the people who do this well are people who realize that the true horror is in being a human.
Yeah.
One of the things that made me chuckle about this film is when Paul is the character in the movie, not the director. Paul, who was he's going through the scrapbook. He sees, little baby Kathy Bates, like little girl Kathy Bates, and then Kathy Bates is a schoolgirl, and there's a booster pennant for Nixon. She was a Nixon supporter.
It's so
She's
funny
Republican.
You say that. I just saw my favorite movie of the past couple of years in the horror arena is Bones and All, which is based on a book, and I hope that someone covers it on your show. And if they don't, please have me back, and I would love to talk about it because it is based on a novel. Its only political statement is that the biggest asshole in the movie has a Bush 84 sticker on his pickup truck. And it felt because King does the same thing. There's I think it could be in The Dead Zone at somewhere else where like our villain, the description of their car, they have a Reagan Bush 84 sticker. I love that. That's like a straight up Stephen King move.
Which is why it's silly to me when people complain about him being political now. Like, are you
It's all
kidding?
there.
It's always been there. He's been telegraphing this since the 70s, y'all.
He sure has been.
I love the fact that Kathy Bates won the Academy Award for this performance, because horror doesn't get nearly enough, the accolades that it deserves.
You said you've covered Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
What a back-to-back year for horror hitting the mainstream was 90 and 91, I think, right? So you had this and Kathy Bates going to awards, and then you had Silence of the Lambs sweeping in the ways that it did. This is a real, I feel like this was like the time where it became like socially acceptable for quote grown-ups who don't live in their parents' basements to like and appreciate horror.
Yeah, well, I think it's just hyped up thriller. That's all it is. It's just a hyped up thriller. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
book or movie?
Right.
Who is this me or is this a free?
It's everybody. It's a free for all.
So it's a free for all. Yes. I'm gonna say the movie. As much as I loved reading the book again, and I listened to it, Lindsay Krause does the audiobook. If I had to pick, I'll watch this movie again. I don't know if I'll pick up this book again. It might be a while. That's my only justification. Because you and I always say tie. Also, we do a lot of ties, and I wanted to kind of make a stand.
I see what you mean about like not reading the book again, because it's very disturbing but I have to say, like, and this isn't unusual. Usually, I think I said last week, usually I read the book and then watch the movie. But in this case, I had seen the movie already and then read the book for the first time this week. I feel like I keep thinking about the book and the themes of the book in a way that I'm not rethinking about the movie. I enjoyed the movie and I loved a lot of the decisions and the choices and the characters. And I think the choices were absolutely spot on. Totally agree. No notes. But in terms of like what made me think the most and feel the most, I'm going to give the edge to the book this time.
Excellent.
Alex. Yes. This is the closest book to movie tie, I feel like. But actually, I feel that way about a lot of Stephen King, like classic Stephen King titles. They both are offering two things extremely well made with a lot of overlap. But I agree with Margot P. in that I think the movie is incredibly well crafted. It's great. I would watch it anytime. It's also quick. Like
yes.
A lot of thrillers and prestige horror thinks that it has to be 2 hours and 20 minutes. This is a cool hour 45, if even, and it is quick. Like I'm always surprised at the plot points that we hit by the time we hit them. I'm like, oh wow, we're going fast. So it's extremely digestible. If this was still a day and age where you flip through television channels and you saw Misery on, I would stop every time. But the book, even though, was there an editor involved? Did anyone speak to how long him putting the actual text of Misery was in there? It is so long. I read that he thought it was going to be literally 1/4 the length of what it actually was, and it's not surprising. All that aside, I notice new things every time I read the book. Because there's so much there and there's so much to take in. It gives me a lot to chew on and think about. I think about it often. So I will say book at 51% over 49.
I also want to say that
it's a cheat.
I also want to say this is one of the best books and movies about writing. And if you're a writer, you could really relate to this, I find.
I agree.
Alex, when you popped out for a second, Margot and I talked about what we want to cover next. And I don't think you can guess, so we'll just tell you.
I love it.
we were driving back from LA yesterday. We've been listening. Todd and I have been listening to this thing on. I must be on like Sirius or something, and it's we listen to it every weekend these days. It's the original MTV VJs.
Oh yeah.
Do a countdown, the top 40 of that particular week. In this case, the week of right before Halloween of 19. This time it was 1980, but it's a different year in the 80s every time, so it's not so same.
Familiar with it, yes.
And so we were driving back from Los Angeles. It was a long drive. The traffic was horrible. We're driving, and one of the it was in the top 10 was, and I had forgotten that Lionel Richie wrote this song, but it was Lady, which is not a movie, but it was like this great like crossover moment with Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers, and it was one of the reasons why it was such a hit and why they were able to do this kind of weird, very bizarre crossover kind of moment was because of the success of songs like Coward of the County, The Gambler.
We're covering The Gambler.
That's great news.
We're going to talk about the song and the movie.
I didn't know that it was based on. Is the movie based on the song?
Yes.
Huh.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
By a few years. So that's what we're going to be covering. It's streaming on Amazon. Very easy to get. The song is super easy. It'll stay in your brain for a while. Just warning you if you're not used to The Gambler.
Oh, interesting. Have you all covered? That Springsteen song turned movie, I think it's called Highway Patrolman.
No.
I think realizing now that The Gambler was turned into a movie is what just triggered it for me. But he has one, and Sean Penn was in it as the primary character, and it's based on the song Highway Patrolman. I think it's Highway Patrolman is the song from Nebraska.
Is a little dark.
Very, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not an uplifting
No.
one.
Well, if any of you have ideas out there, all those places I mentioned at the top of the show, send us your suggestions. Also, once again, the email is bookversusmoviepodcast@gmail.com. Alex, where can people find you?
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You Are Good. You can find us there. We do that. And then I don't know what it's called, so I don't even know how to pitch it. But early next year have what I'm calling a surrealist dream talk show that I'm launching on Twitch. So, if you follow us over on You Are Good, you'll get announcements about that too. So listen to us on You Are Good, and then hopefully you'll find out about more stuff early next year.
Excellent. Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com and all of